Welcome everybody back to another episode on Misfit TV. This is the Buckets Only podcast where we bring all basketball talk straight to you. I am your host, Jay, and I have the homie Jake back with another banger. Jake, how are you doing today, my guy?
Excited for the NBA Finals, man. I'm excited to see how this season ends out.
Bro, we have trucked through. We started off this podcast with three straight. Is coronavirus going to affect the NBA season coming back based episodes? Well, now the season's back and it's in full effect to the point that we're down to home stretch. This is the climax of the NBA season. We are in the NBA Finals, and it is the Miami Heat and the Los Angeles Lakers in the finals. We have seen a ton of different things happen leading up to this point. So, Jake, we've seen the Denver Nuggets come from 3-1, not once, but twice. We've seen the dramatic battle between Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell. We saw the collapse, unfortunately, on your end of the LA Clippers, the favorites to win the whole thing. We saw the Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics all tip over in a very early exit in terms of what their original standards were coming into this postseason. Before we get to the NBA Finals, what out of all the different kinds of moments and milestones that we've seen throughout this time frame of the NBA bubble and the NBA playoffs in general, what was like your favorite moment or favorite series so far up to this point?
I mean, honestly, it was the Toronto versus Boston series. Boston went up 3-1 and Toronto fought all the way back. And in the end, it just wasn't enough. But the amount of skill, not only skill, but the amount of coaching talent between those two teams is remarkable. I mean, you just look at Brad Stevens, who is a proven NBA coach. He's been with the Celtics for years now. He's been successful pretty much since he got there. And then you have Nick Nurse, who recently, as in the past few years, has kind of jumped into the spotlight, but he's very quickly cemented himself as one of the game's best active coaches. With a squad that most people wrote off after Kawhi left last offseason, but they were still right there in a game 7 in the semifinals playing up against Boston, and they just couldn't get the job done. But that was an insane series to watch, in my opinion, especially the OG Anunoby buzzer beater with the Kyle Lowry pass over Taco's 7'6" frame. It was crazy.
Honestly, bouncing off of that, like looking at the Celtics series, like, the biggest thing about that series that was so interesting to me was just that, like, Toronto got written off early. I mean, granted, game 3 without that that OG shot, you honestly look back at it and wonder if they had went 3-0, would that series have went nearly the distance that it went beforehand? Would it even sniffed a game 7 had they dropped game 3? Literally coming off as like the hand of God, literally allowing them to not only get the perfect pass, but the perfect shooting pocket to get the 3-point shot up in the first place. It's circumstances like that that always make the NBA playoffs in general so spectacular. So I kind of can't help but piggyback with you on that. But if I had to pick one in particular moment, honestly, I would go with Jamal Murray individually against Utah. I feel like that was his series. That was his coming out party. And granted, everything against the Clippers is what will probably submit their bulletin board material moving next season was, hey, we're the team that took out the so-called favorites coming into the playoffs. We're the ones who put them out. We're the ones who went the distance and made it to the Western Conference Finals. If you also put it in perspective, the Nuggets have continued to build up year after year. This was a team a couple of years ago that had a winner go home last game of the season with the Minnesota Timberwolves and fell just short. And since then, they've not only made the playoffs every year, but they've advanced at least around every single year, which with that type of trajectory would have them thinking that they're an NBA Finals team next season just based off the sheer, upgrade or sure improvements that they've had. But in that series in particular against Utah, I think that was the series that finally put the stamp of respect on the Nuggets. I feel like they're a team over the last couple of years that's been in the top 3, 4, even the top 2 at one point, one of these past seasons, and always kind of was just seen as like a filler team, which is so interesting about a top seed because you never really feel as though they're just there off of like, pure regular season run up. Like you look at them and say they're a legitimate threat. There's a reason why they have a 40 plus winning season, a near 50 plus 50 win type of season. Yet they always kind of got doubted. And I feel like that series against Utah and then topping it with the Clippers series is the type of combination that'll make them like finally a team that everybody will keep their eyes on. Leaning off of the disrespect part, because it's kind of crazy that that's where I ended off, but there were a lot of coaching situations in general based off these NBA playoffs. Mike D'Antoni is no longer the coach of the Rockets. I mean, the one that I'm going to ask you about in a second, Doc Rivers, who is no longer a coach for the LA Clippers, is huge. Obviously, a lot of situations regarding Nate McMillan and other coaches that we've talked about, and actually a past episode about a lot of the coaching carousel stuff going on in the NBA. But the one that's the most interesting now up to date is the LA Clippers situation. So as the designated Clippers fan on the podcast, what were the initial reactions or initial thoughts to this happening?
Well, see, this has already been like a crazy off season, and it's not even the off season yet. Like, you've seen all these coaches getting fired, and then like the day after the Clippers lost the Game 7 game to the Nuggets, there were reports that came out that said um, they're not firing Doc. He will be back next season, and so that was what 2 weeks ago. I think they lost 2 weeks ago tonight. Um, and so you had this feeling of, okay, are they just going to run it back with the same team? Because like Doc, the reason he left the Celtics was because he didn't want to do a rebuild. He didn't want to be there for the long haul. And Steve Ballmer is clearly one of the more daring owners who wants to see that change that really solidifies the Clippers as a title contender. Um, and so I love Doc, not just from a Clippers standpoint, but the stuff that he does for social justice off the court. He was one of the most vocal voices about these social justice issues while in the bubble. So just his personality, his character, how he handles himself and the team is amazing. Um, but 2-3-1 leads blown in the semifinals in a span of 5 years, man. It's hard to deal with that. And he just kind of wanted to run back the same team as last year, and management had otherwise. And so I hope it was mutual, because after everything that he's done for the organization, going back to carrying us through the Donald Sterling scandal days, where he was kind of able to not necessarily right the ship, but keep all the guys together and focused and get him with the right mindset, and how he handled that. I'm sad to see him go, but I think from a basketball standpoint, it was a very necessary move.
And I think you talking about the idea of him, quote unquote, righting the ship or at least putting things back on track post Donald Sterling is huge, because if you look at it, the Clippers have more of a history of being, having a lot of injury prone players, having struggling seasons, different things like that. And it was at one point deemed the cursed franchise by a lot of different circumstances. And once Doc Rivers burst onto the scene for that team, the culture of that team drastically changed over the course of half a decade. And I think that's huge to point out, because a lot of people are going to point out win-to-loss ratio record, different situations regarding the 3-1 leads blown, not reaching the conference finals, different things like that. And of course, the biggest thing is you had the Lob City Clippers, you've had the underachieved Clippers that took the Warriors full strength to 6 games. And then, of course, you have a Kawhi Leonard, Paul George team dropped into that exact same team I referenced against Golden State, and they don't even get past the Denver Nuggets, who coming into this year, like I mentioned earlier, were relatively underrated or, kind of thrown under the bus in terms of being in the championship scheme of things. So, like you said before, I hope it's mutual too. It sounds as though his statements so far have indicated that he still wants to coach, and he's not going to do a similar thing to Nate McMillan, who kind of wants a year away to kind of, I guess, decompress. With that all being said, Jake, floor is yours easily, bro. Who do you want to be your coach going into next year? It's a lot of options, scary amount of options. Like, I know we're not gonna have a great free agency class, but shoot, when it comes to coaches, they are sure filling up the holes in that area. So like, you have a lot of people to pick from the litter from. So let's say not your number one, but let's say the top 3 guys on the market that you would like to take a look at and possibly have as a coach for your team next year.
I mean, a lot of people are saying that D'Antoni would be good with us. I'd rather not go that route. I think he has a very defined coaching style that isn't really subject to change. A guy that I really want is homegrown. He's been with us as an assistant the past year. He's coached with Doc before, and that's Ty Lue. He is, out of all the coaches on the market, he's the only one that has experience playing with one of, if not the best player in the league in LeBron James. And he's a guy who, I think a lot of people forget that last offseason he was close to signing a deal with the Lakers to become their head coach, but there were disagreements. The Lakers wanted to give him a 3-year deal. He wanted a 5-year deal. And so eventually negotiations fell through. He went throughout the summer without a deal, and he signed on with the Clippers as assistant coach to Doc. And so he already knows the players. He has chemistry with them. He knows all of their play styles. But he also has the championship coaching experience. I mean, he took over in the middle of the year after the Cavs fired David Blatt, and he took them to a championship with LeBron and Kyrie. So this is a guy who can really, I mean, he can change a franchise. I'm still really surprised that he isn't a head coach like for this past season. But I think the Clippers' best chance of winning is with the championship coaches at the realm. So I think I want Ty Lue.
I mean, sounds like an easy choice. I do think that the difficult part about Ty Lue is just the fact that he's highly coveted right now. It seems like his name is being thrown in literally every coaching discussion there is. And apparently there's a lot of discussion for a handful of teams in terms of not only just kind of bringing him in, but dang near signing him on the spot. I would say the only team that hasn't shown a ton of quote unquote interest, at least within the national media, is the 76ers, who Elton Brand has apparently made it clear that it's Mike D'Antoni's job to lose, which is interesting to say.
Not Doc. I think Tyronn Lue did meet with them within the past couple of days.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part about it.
We haven't
Yeah.
heard anything about how their meeting went or anything like that.
Yeah, and that's what I mean when I say like it's kind of like under the rug from like a national media standpoint, because like we have evidence that Elton Brand said out loud, made it clear on the record, like it's D'Antoni's job to lose. I think that's an interesting statement to just throw in the street. I also think that that probably has a lot to do with why anything in relation to a conversation with Ty Lue hasn't been said when you already kind of put that energy out there.
And
I don't know if Ty
also,
Lue wants to jump on that.
And that also came before Doc was fired or
True.
parted ways. Because from the Sixers' perspective, you have D'Antoni, a guy who traded away his decent center mid-season to go small ball. I don't see how he would really fit with Philly unless he were to say, all right, we're doing things my way. Joel, you're going to Brooklyn, or you're going to Boston or Miami or someplace. So I think D'Antoni, I mean, I could see him playing or coaching the Sixers. I don't know if it would be the right move for them, but I do expect that we'll see Tyronn Lue signing with the team within the next couple of days.
Definitely. And I mean, if it's your team, that works even easier because, like you said, the homegrown aspect of it and the ability to just step in with a roster he's already familiar with is huge. So, I mean, I think that's going to be a big deal. Moving on to the big entree of the episode, obviously, is the NBA Finals. We've talked about a lot of the big moments and big news that has occurred throughout this entire playoff process, but now we have to, of course, discuss the biggest elephant in the room, which is, Jake, we're going to start with the Miami Heat. What are the keys to the series for the Miami Heat to come out as the NBA champions this season, considering there was a 60 to 1 chance they even made it this far, and now there's still a plus 300 odd, you know, basically in the betting world of being able to win this series. So they're extreme underdogs, whether Jimmy Butler and that team want to admit it or not. So what do you feel like are the keys to success if they're going to win this series?
Honestly, it's their momentum and where their mind is at, because they've gone through Milwaukee, they've gone through Boston, but they haven't matched up with a team featuring two of the top five players in the league. And I've said this, I would guess probably the last 3 weeks, that yeah, the Heat are very good, but they haven't faced any adversity yet in the playoffs. They have pretty much steamrolled their opponents. They did go to 6 games against Boston, but outside of that, this is a team that's pretty much bulldozed their opponents. And I don't see them being able to do that with the Lakers. I think that they're going to have to be prepared to change their game plan up and have to play the Lakers game, because they've kind of been forcing teams to match their intensity. I don't think you can do that with the Lakers, because this is a team that is already very intense. And so I think it's going to really come down to their young guys, um, because we know who Jimmy Butler is. Everyone knows that he's a dog out there, and he's going to do whatever he can, and he's will do whatever he can to bring that championship back to Miami. Um, but I think it's the young guys. Can they stay hot on the world's biggest stage?
I mean, kind of bouncing off the young guy's point, but also the playing um truly up against the Lakers. The Lakers have been a relatively bigger team this entire postseason. As of recent, obviously in that past series against the Nuggets, there was a point where in game 5 they had leaned to starting Dwight Howard and then made drastic changes defensively for that team. And I think playing big is going to be something that they're going to have to lean on a little bit. So really my quote unquote key to success is really just Bam Adebayo's ability to hang with a guy like Anthony Davis. I'm not saying that he has to be able to go blow for blow. I'm not saying if Anthony Davis scores 30, Bam has to have 32. But what I'm saying that his ability to hang tight with AD at the best of his ability and also be able to translate that on the defensive end of the floor is going to be what really dictates the pace of this series. Because if Bam Adebayo and AD are going blow for blow, the Miami Heat have more scoring options than the Lakers do. I think we both can easily agree on the fact that for the majority of these playoffs, it has been LeBron, AD, or bust. We've had a certain couple of games here and there where Rajon Rondo kind of burst onto the scene. Markieff Morris and Kyle Kuzma combined for 20 plus points, things of that nature that have happened. But for the most part, they have those two guys carrying them, and that is, pretty much the dynamic of their team. I think that with the amount of scores that the Heat have, Goran Dragic, Tyler Hero, who had a coming out party, obviously Jimmy Butler on that side, Duncan Robinson, who I think is going to be huge in this series specifically. I mean, this has real shades of like 2003, 2004 finals Pistons versus Lakers to me, which is like extremely ironic because it's the Lakers again. But the dynamic duo versus the surefire team with an established identity, I feel like that's something that we need to keep an eye out on, because of the fact that like we've seen this historically happen. Maybe it's not happened a ton of times. We don't have a significant track record of it, but a team with an established identity, a handful of guys who understand their role and play within that and do it at a high level against a dynamic duo, we've seen it work itself out here and there. So I think the Heat have a better puncher's chance than a lot of people are giving them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. I think kind of as we've gone on through the playoffs, the Heat have definitely gotten and gained much more respect than they entered the playoffs with. But there's still, I mean, anyone that the Lakers face are going to be seen as underdogs simply because of LeBron and AD, who are arguably they have two top five players in the league, and no other team has that. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it'll be really interesting. I think the Heat are not as big of underdogs anymore as they were looked at even a couple weeks ago. But there's a lot that needs to go right for them if they want to win.
So like let's transition over to the Lakers point of view. Obviously being the favorite, that comes with a lot of expectation besides, the fact that you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis on your team, which already bears a lot of media attention and a lot of responsibility to kind of get the job done. So from that perspective, what do the Lakers have to do, or what do you feel like is going to be needed from the Lakers in order to avoid being upset?
I mean, I know you said it, but Anthony Davis and LeBron need to play their best because, in my opinion, it's no debate at all that the Heat, outside of the top two guys, so if you don't talk about LeBron or AD or Jimmy or Bam, the Heat have a much better team. I mean, the Lakers are a team that have been carried by LeBron and AD all season. Whereas, and then it's like a big deal when, like you said, Rajon Rondo has a good game. It's like, oh, like Rondo had like 10 assists. He really helped out tonight, which NBA fans are not accustomed to with the Lakers this season because we are still asking who's their third guy. And so I don't know if they have a third guy or if they're doing a third guy by committee where they just go night by night and say, all right, you're shooting well, you're our third guy, go out there and score. Um, but if they want to win the finals, they're gonna need LeBron and AD to play their best. And I'm not saying that they can't, but if they play less than their best, they're gonna really struggle because their role players just are no match at all for the Heat.
And I think that's why I actually go the other route and say that somebody has to step up as a consistent third guy, or at least that third guy by committee aspect that you touched on, because the Miami Heat clearly do that. The Miami Heat clearly have done that. There was a night where Tyler Hero had 37 because he was the one with the hot hand. We've seen Duncan Robinson have nights where he had 15 points on 5 threes. I think it was 5 of 7 one night was where he went. Goran Dragic has been underrated this entire postseason, averaging 20 points per game. And that's not even touching on guys like Jay Crowder, Andre Iguodala, who's going to get a lot more minutes in this series in particular. I mean, this is a team, even in a lesser degree, their whole roster has kind of played more within their scheme than normal playoff teams do. I mean, we've mainly only seen a handful of games where they didn't go deeper than, the typical 6 to 7 man rotation that we see in playoff series. We've seen them do this frequently, kind of in the way that we've seen the Toronto Raptors do for a majority of the season. They understand their depth and they lean on that. There was a point where Kendrick Nunn was not even a factor around the first two series of the playoffs, granted coming off of coronavirus, but nonetheless, Tyler Hero stepped up in his absence, and Kendrick Nunn steps back in and maybe doesn't perform to the same regular season level Kendrick Nunn that we saw, but definitely was still a contributor nonetheless. So I think the Lakers' way of dodging the smoke of getting upset simply comes down to the fact that I feel like LeBron James and AD can do theirs, but the Heat have so much firepower that they have to understand that they can't win it by themselves. I feel like they're going to have to have 4 tremendously insane great nights to get it done. And I don't know if against a Miami Heat team that's pesky on defense, plays together, plays within their scheme strong, and, is the second best defensive team, ironically, behind only the Lakers in the league, if they're going to be able to have, you know, historical nights 4 times out of a 7-game series. So I think it's gonna come down to whoever that third person is.
See, but they've been having a tryout for who that third guy is all season, and they haven't brought anyone up. They haven't said haven't been able to show a third guy. It's been you're a third guy a night, you're a third guy a night. So how do they? I mean, I don't see how they manage that unless they try to designate it and get that third guy momentum at the beginning of the series, because they have some they have good role players, but they can be detrimental to the team if they're not performing at their best. We've seen Kuzma have flashes where he looks like he could be a legit third guy on the team. And then we've seen flashes of Kuzma where he is a bench player and nothing more than that. I mean, I think he was a starter at the beginning of the season. He's not a starter anymore because they bring him off the bench. You can't, I mean, that's not your third guy. Caruso is a fan favorite, obviously. I don't see the hype around him. And I think that just has a lot to do with heart and being the guy that all the fans love. But talent wise, I don't think he brings a lot to the table. Markieff Morris is a guy that we can see shoot the three, but again, he's streaky. He's either good or he's bad. There's no real consistency when I look at him. And then JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard are obviously not really third guys for a team that has Anthony Davis with them, because it would cause a clog down low.
So I mean, okay, let's take all the positives, let's take all the negatives of both teams, and let's put it into a final question before we get to the question of the day and wrap this whole thing up. Is gun to your head, feet to the fire. Who are you going with for the series, and how far do you think it goes?
I got the Miami Heat in 7 games. I think they're going to go down 3-2, and then they're just going to, I mean, Jimmy is going to get locked in. He's just going to be unstoppable.
Look, Jake, I didn't think this was going to happen. I thought I was going to have to play devil's advocate, but we are on the We Agree podcast train right now because honestly, I got them winning in 7-2, and I think that the Heat are dangerous. Somebody's going to have to talk me out of that wheelhouse before I see it otherwise. There was a lot of stuff that you named off about the Lakers supporting cast that I can't say about the Miami Heat. I feel like the only thing that we're saying here is that they don't have two top 5 players on their roster, and that's not something I'm going to argue against, but they've proven so far in this postseason that they don't need it. We can talk about their road to the finals all we want to, but there was, superstar talent in their way, whether or not it played up to the talent caliber that it is, and guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Victor Oladipo, who truly wasn't that available, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who kind of had to come on strong late in order to kind of even make it a series. These are guys that may not have played up to their potential, but that might have had a lot to do with the Heat more than it had to do with the other players falling under the pressure. So it's something that we'll never know, but looking at it, it just kind of looks like everything is written up for the Heat. And, funny enough, as 2020 as it would be for the Lakers to win the championship the same year that Kobe passed, what more 2020 like thing would it be than the team that had a 60-1 odd to 60-1 odds to even make it this far to then go ahead and win the finals altogether. It almost kind of feels very 2020-esque, and it's kind of a hard hype train not to lean into.
And it's like
Yeah.
it's the current LeBron with the Lakers versus his former team, who has really established a very new and very different identity since he left, of this kind of underdog mentality.
Yes,
So it's
sir.
definitely going to be a fun series.
It's gonna be it's one to go down in the history books because regardless, it'll be our first and potentially our only NBA bubble playoff finals champion being crowned. So, question of the day for everybody is pretty much just like, let's put it in grand perspective. Who do you have in this 7-game series, and how far do you think the series will go? Leave it in the comments down below. Jake, banger as always, bro. We are really at home stretch right now. This is crazy. I'm glad that we've been able to do this for this whole time and really get back on track. Content will only go up from here as the playoffs and the finals in particular pick up and things get crazy. So if you guys enjoy our content, thank you for clicking the subscribe button. If you haven't already, turn that thing blue already, dude. Get it done, handle it, because I'm telling you, the content only gets better from here. Like, comment, and like I said before, definitely subscribe. Jake, it's been a heater. We will catch you on the next one. Peace.